Watch this.
We're now seeing more people dying from COVID than ever before in Idaho. And now we're also running out of space in our morgues and funeral homes. Finding workers has been a struggle for everyone. Well, the need for qualified help at one Idaho nonprofit could mean the difference between having a safe place to sleep at night and the street. A big lie? Idaho election officials say not at all. But they're recounting presidential ballots in several counties anyway, all by hand. Nearly 3,000 Idahoans have died from the coronavirus in the past year and a half. 2,854 to be exact, and that number is going to likely go up in a few minutes when they release the latest numbers. It's been the deadliest month for COVID ever in Idaho, capped by the deadliest day on September 11th. That day, the state set a record with 25 COVID deaths in just one day. With such high volumes of deaths each day, funeral homes and crematoria are overwhelmed, more than overwhelmed, more than they have been before. So much so, they're running out of space to house some of the bodies. Katya Stepovic is at Cloverdale Funeral Home in Boise. And Katya, they've had to bring in some help, outside storage, to be able to keep up with the amount of deaths.
Well, that's absolutely right. And you can see the massive refrigerated trailer right behind me. And they had to bring that in because at Cloverdale Funeral Service, they don't have any more refrigeration space inside their facility. Now, in just 2 weeks, this trailer behind me is holding up to 15 people as we speak.
This truck is about 8.5 or 9 feet wide. It's lined on both sides with racks that are 3 high.
This refrigerated trailer parked outside of the Cloverdale Funeral Home can hold up to 50 bodies.
There's room for an additional approximate 10 if we use additional, tables or something of that nature. Everyone has their own space. There's no overloading. That's one thing that was the reason for bringing this in, was I didn't want to have the situation where we were without space for people.
Bringing in extra storage to preserve bodies while they wait for a cremation service is something that Dave Solova, managing partner at Cloverdale Funeral Homes, says he's never had to even think about doing until now.
One came available and we brought it up about 2 weeks ago now and got it ready, and it was needed immediately. In 47 years, I've never experienced anything like this.
During the month of September alone, Solova recorded 28 deaths due to COVID. On any given September, the normal death toll would be around 50 at the funeral home. This month alone, it was 80. Statewide, 220 people died from COVID in August. In September, that number nearly doubled to 401 deaths in just 1 month.
We've had people as young as in their 20s. And there are sometimes health circumstances, but there's been times that there wasn't, and so it's hard to tell exactly who's safe from it. I don't think anybody really is,
Solova says the cremation rate is 70% of their services. Typically, cremation services can take up to 5 days, but because of increased deaths, families are waiting up to 15 days to get their loved one back. The refrigerated storage is needed during the wait time.
This is a crematory facility. It'll take anywhere from about 2 to 3 hours usually. Yeah.
It's a process that shouldn't and can't be rushed, but the unprecedented death toll is adding pressure.
We have just one crematory here and on our facilities, and we can do as many as 5 or 6 cremations a day. But given the volume that there is, it still takes time to accomplish that. We have to have permits and we have to have the death certificate signed. The doctors are very, very busy at the hospitals, and they've been really great getting those things out, but sometimes it's 2 or 3 or 5 days before they can get back to paperwork, and that just prolongs things on our end of things before we're able to do things as well. This is one of our sister firms bringing a cremation for us to do. We do cremations for a couple of other of our sister firms in the area.
While no grieving process is easy, Solova says the process feels different when loved ones lose someone to the virus.
It's one thing to lose someone in an accident or if they've had a long cancer death or something like that, but this is just something that most people aren't planning on. They're not figuring on. And even though we've been talking about it for a couple of years now and dealing with it for a couple of years, they're still just not ready at the time.
Solova says in December of last year, many people had their loved ones embalmed instead of waiting for cremations. But that's not the case this time. And the last thing he wants to see is this trailer fill up.
I hope we don't get to that point. The fact that we're putting 10 to 12 to 15 people there currently, I'm just glad that we have a place that we can put them that is clean and professional and secure. If we see that trailer fill up, I think that we're going to see a lot of other things change around the area. I think I know the governor is hesitant to go back to mandates of any kind, but when a death rate reaches extreme levels, something else has to change.
That's a pretty big statement there, Katya, but I know that Cloverdale isn't the only funeral home in the area. How are other funeral homes dealing with this?
Well, honestly, Brian, I reached out to more funeral homes than I can even count on my fingers. And every single one of them told me they're experiencing high volumes that they've ever seen before. And even one also told me that they're looking into bringing similar storage that you see behind me at Cloverdale.
One other quick question. I know you mentioned the crematory having a delay. What about funerals themselves? Are those also being pushed back because of this backup?
You know, funerals, not yet. I can say that confidently. As you heard, 70% are cremation requests. So they don't have as many requests for funerals, and they're not seeing that delay at the moment. But again, like most of this pandemic, that could change very quickly.
Yeah, we heard about it yesterday from Representative Cheney. His mother's funeral has been pushed back weeks. It's affecting a lot of things. Thank you very much, Katya. So piggybacking off what Katya just mentioned, it's been a deadly month for Idahoans. The numbers are there to prove it too. Let's take a look at COVID deaths since the pandemic began. The big peak back in December, you can see that there in the middle of your screen. Total of 457 COVID-related deaths across the state that month. Remember, that was when the vaccine was just introduced, so it was fairly new. And at this point, only frontline workers and those elderly participants were able to get it. After that, we saw a dramatic drop in those deaths. From January to July of this year, all told, from January to July, 696 COVID deaths, averaging out to about 116 per month. Well, yeah, the vaccine rollout helped with that. By spring, by mid-May, everyone over the age of 12 became eligible to get vaccinated. Then things started to really pick up in August, as you can see, starting with a few deaths every day. But around mid-August, we started seeing double-digit death totals regularly. 220 Idahoans died in August. But then as we go to September, it's really given us a run for our money. Numbers aren't likely going to be completed for another week or so. But so far, 401 deaths. A number that will continue to rise as the state works to clear the backlog of cases that are still out there, including deaths. We are on pace to beat last December. One record that we can confirm at this point, the deadliest day of the pandemic, September 11th, 25 deaths that we said already on that day alone. More deaths in the month of September than the previous 4 months combined. These numbers, again, are going to go up as more of them are processed and reported to the state. If you remember one number today, remember this one. 2,854. Again, a number that's likely to go up before we even end this show. That's how many Idahoans have died since the pandemic began. Getting back to that backlog, yesterday the state issued a warning. The case data for the most recent 2-week period is incomplete. And the reason for that, because there have been more cases to process than people to process them. They say right now there are about 11,500 positive cases still pending. Well, another casualty of the COVID crisis, services for at-risk youth. Today, the Idaho Youth Ranch announced its closing of its Hayes House. Now, just the house, not the whole facility. And it's a temporary home, the Hayes House is, for runaways, homeless kids, victims of abuse, or those who just need a safe place. And they're the only such facility in the Treasure Valley. They have capacity to help more than a dozen kids aged 9 to 17, and they have 18 beds for use at the Hayes House. Last year, they provided 3,000 shelter nights to kids in crisis. But right now, They're not able to keep any at a place or give any of them a place to stay. 24-hour home is usually open, but it actually closed down a couple of weeks ago on September 14th after the last resident transitioned out. They stopped housing kids in crisis at the end of August. And the reason, like a lot of other services these days, staffing shortages. As you can imagine, a home like this with the specialized care that is needed, you couldn't just push through some staffing gaps. But that didn't make that decision to pause any easier.
It's really hard. It's hard for our entire staff across the whole state to know that there are kids that need the residential care that we don't have right now. At the same time, we knew we didn't have another option because the only other option was to provide low quality care and not maintain the standards that we need to maintain, both for the kids' sake and for the staff's sake. It's a challenging workplace, and people need time to rejuvenate, right, and keep their own wellness. And so as the pandemic has lingered, we've had real trouble filling staff positions from what would be normal attrition. We just haven't been able to fill in the staff position. So that has become more and more critical. And we just reached a point by the end of August where we could not fully staff the facility 24 hours a day and provide the level of care to the kids.
Scott Curtis says they need about a dozen more staff members to get on that road to reopening. Even then, it's going to take some time. First, they have to find the right passionate people who want to work with kids who've had to deal with some sort of trauma. Then they have to train them to do that. Plus, there's an extensive background check that goes along with that. They're still providing help, though, through their 24-hour crisis line. But if you or someone you know would be interested in helping this nonprofit essential youth service get back up and running, we're going to have a link to their website in this story at ktvb.com. Nearly a year after the presidential election, there are still claims of voter fraud, still circulating, even in Idaho. An allegation, though, that isn't sitting well with Idaho's election officials. As you probably noticed, we're not going to shy away from controversial topics here either on the 208. Tell us what you want us to look into for our next show. We make it easy. All you got to do is text us at this number, 208-321-5614. Just be sure to include your name and the hashtag #the208. Oh, you can send your comments and your complaints there, too. All right, today, September 30th, 2021. It's been more than 10 months since that election day of 2020 when President Joe Biden was elected president. Guess what, though? We're still talking about the results of that presidential election. Because now Idaho is in the national spotlight after a conspiracy got traction and all of Idaho counties had their election results altered. That was the conspiracy. That happened in Idaho. Election results in counties across the state had their election results altered from some sort of digital manipulation. Conspiracy powered by a man named Mike Lindell. You may have heard of him. Yeah, you probably recognize his name from TV ads. He's the one that sells pillows. The Idaho Secretary of State's office was then flooded with emails and phone calls about the election manipulation claims, so they decided they were going to take a look at it. It's a major accusation, of course, having every county's election results manipulated. One thing became quickly apparent to the Secretary of State's office, though. The conspiracy claims being made about Idaho are literally impossible if you research how Idaho conducts elections. Here's Joe Paris.
As a part of a massive election fraud conspiracy theory called the Big Lie, claims are being made that all Idaho counties were breached while conducting the 2020 presidential election. This website is the crux of the conspiracy theory. It lays out without evidence how the election results in Idaho and the U.S. were manipulated to favor President Joe Biden and prevent Donald Trump from being reelected as president. Idaho Deputy Secretary of State Chad Houck says looking into election fraud claims is not unusual, but the Big Lie claim was different in the sense of scope and attention.
In this case, given the allegation, given that it is both on a national scope and statewide, implicated every county, we thought it warranted release of the information once it was done.
The Big Lie spreadsheet outlines digital data breaches in all 44 Idaho counties, where they happened and what the vote manipulation looked like. Houck says after seeing the spreadsheet, it was apparent the claims made based on it were off.
One county had been manipulated 4 days after we actually got the results, and the results they gave us 4 days prior were consistent with what they canvassed.
Houck says the data to the left here about the source of digital manipulations were clearly off for several reasons. So they wanted to focus on the election numbers themselves. An initial idea was to try and reverse engineer the numbers to figure out how they were calculated.
It took about 45 minutes to come down to a formula that was consistently applied across all 44 counties. You take the Biden total and the Trump total, you multiply them by 0.0420625. And then whatever number you get there, drop the decimal points. And that's the number of votes that you shift from right to left. And that's how they came up with the formula or the numbers on the spreadsheet.
An interesting note, Houck says he did his calculation on counties in other states to see if they checked out. The ones he tested all matched up, implying that the formula was used to adjust vote totals in all 50 states as well as the national total. The Secretary of State's office takes all fraud claims very seriously, so they audited 2020 election results in Camas and Butte counties. Video recording is there of the entire thing. Both counties came back with nearly identical results. Houck says that the audit shows a human error margin of less than 1%, drastically less than the claims of widespread fraud.
Human error is not fraud. It's just a component of the system when you use humans within the system.
Speaking of humans, that thought raised a red flag for Houck when looking at the Big Lie spreadsheet. There are a handful of Idaho counties that couldn't be hacked digitally at all. They use paper tallies.
At least 7 Idaho counties don't have an electronic or a digital component within their counting and tabulation process.
But what about Idaho's most populated area, Ada County? The Big Lie claims a 21,000 vote difference between their results and the actual results. Is it possible the system was breached?
I do have absolute confidence in our elections. I specifically have confidence in how we've run the elections over this past year, including the 2020 election.
Ada County Clerk Phil McGrain says the county actually audited a large amount of votes in December of 2020 during a recount election. The results there were consistent and showed no evidence of manipulation. McGrain says based on how Ada County does elections, digital manipulation is effectively impossible.
Our vote system, the actual tabulation system that counts your votes, that processes your ballots, and even creates the ballots, that system is kept completely offline. We work very hard to keep that room separated. It's a special secure room inside our facility to ensure the integrity of that process. For someone to tamper with our systems, they must physically be in that space.
All right, Joe, I got a couple questions. Let's start with this one. This number, 0.04202 or 0625. Where'd that come from?
You would have to ask Mike Lindell and the people at the election symposium, as it was in national news in recent weeks, Brian. There was a group of Trump supporters that are very adamant that the election was manipulated, and they continue to try and prove this. The evidence, though, that they supposedly have, it's not compelling. And when experts and independent analysts look at it, they say it doesn't make sense. So
why then does a state like Idaho give this any oxygen?
Yeah, and I asked that the Deputy Secretary of State Chad Houck. I said, could you just ignore this? And they could just ignore it, but it is such a bold claim to say that every single Idaho county was accessed and manipulated digitally that it is important for them to look into. And they look into a lot of voter fraud claims, Brian, and we don't know about a lot of them because they don't come up to be a big deal.
They don't publicize them.
Correct. This one they wanted to publicize. So this action of auditing an election and looking into claims, that's not unusual. What's unusual is the size and scope of the entire thing.
Okay. Interesting.
And really, the whole thing's important to the Secretary of State's office, and they want to work on voter education because they get a lot of the same questions.
Sure.
So they've actually started a YouTube series that I was watching today, and they have all kinds of like in-depth answers to questions that I've seen from our viewers about how does tabulation work, how does the system work, how does everything work, and I think that it's something we're going to talk about closer to election season. But if you're interested, you can check out the Secretary of State's website on YouTube.
So that way you can eliminate any chance of there being any secrecy when it comes to elections in Idaho.
Yeah, they want everyone to see everything. So there you go.
We have seen everything. Thanks, Joe.
Well, those are some beautiful sunset pictures, and sunset is coming earlier every evening, but we've got some great weather going on right now. Temperatures today up into the low 70s throughout most of the Treasure Valley, upper 60s at least in the lower valley areas, and even in the mountain areas, almost as warm in many of the mountain valleys as it was down in the Magic Valley, for example, today. And we have clear skies across the region, no freeze warnings, no frost warnings, not as cold tonight. There may still be some patchy spots with frost down into especially the Magic Valley, but otherwise not quite as cold tonight because of a little high cloudiness that'll be coming through. By the way, Saturday, beautiful weather for the home football game. Boise State meets up with Nevada. 70 degrees at kickoff time around 1:30 with light winds and plenty of sunshine, warming up to around 74 or 75 before the game is over. The extended forecast keeps us in this very nice warm pattern right on through the weekend, warming up even more to the upper 70s and low 80s through early next week. Sunny days, clear nights, and then a little fall weather does start to return starting around the middle of next week. Still not bad. Drops temperatures back down into the low to mid 70s through the end of the week. Next weekend, we might be seeing a little more fall weather coming our way, but otherwise dry and warm until then. Don't go away.
All right, final segment of the show. Let's get to some of the comments you sent in during today's show. Like this one, didn't get a name with this one, but the question is, or the comment I should say, regarding election audits. With the amount of money I pay in state taxes on top of the lump sum check I have to send in, do not use my tax money on an unnecessary election audit. Your guy won the state of Idaho, your guy, I guess, by a wide margin. Let's move on, referring to Trump, I assume, because yes, Idaho overwhelmingly voted for Trump. But the money, by the way, right now, I think Joe was saying it was about $2,500, but this money's coming out of a federal fund that's kind of set aside for audits like this. It is tax money, but the money is kind of set aside for things like this. And right now, it's about $2,500 to kind of go over these these ballots that they're doing this weekend. It sounds like a death sentence if you have to go to the hospital. If they're losing that many people to COVID, maybe they need to change their protocol on how they are treating them. That's not exactly true. We showed this last week and earlier this week. At St. Al's alone, they've saved more people than the entire state has lost to COVID. So no, it's not a death sentence. You got to trust your medical providers. We'll see you tomorrow.